Good morning. It is the Awesemo NBA strategy show sponsored by PrizePicks and was supposed to be a 5-game slate. It's been reduced to 4 games as such as the current state of the NBA. Chicago Bulls not playing today. They were originally on the slate. So 4 games, Detroit, Indiana, Philly, Brooklyn, New York, Houston, Washington, Phoenix. So even though we only have 1 game canceled due to COVID, we do have other value that's opened up due to the amount of guys that are out. So 4-game slate, but plenty to talk about. Adam, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Excited to talk about an 8-man Nets team and like an 8-man Knicks team. Should be a good time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anytime we could go back to talking about David Duke again on the Nets and trying to figure out who's going to be playing minutes for them, it is always exciting. But the first game we're going to be starting with here, it is the Detroit at Indiana game. And on the Detroit Pistons side of this game, they do have Jeremy Grant out, but I actually think this is one of the least appealing teams to be targeting on the slate. Cade Cunningham, who, what are we, a month removed from Cade Cunningham being 4,000 and people calling him Fade Cunningham. He's up to 8,600 on DraftKings. And I think a lot of the pricing here is pretty fair. But is there anybody on the cheaper end that makes sense to you when we have guys like Jeremy Grant and Kelly Olynyk out?
I don't really see a whole lot here. I mean, we have Killian Hayes listed as available, Corey Joseph and Amadou Diallo listed as available. So that keeps this team from being really shorthanded. You know, Jeremy Grant's absence spreads some usage around. It, you would think, benefits Saddiq Bey, although he still managed to be absolutely awful in 26 minutes in the last game without Grant. Diallo started. He only played 20 minutes. Killian Hayes played 20 minutes. You got a really good game from Frank Jackson off the bench in 31 minutes. Like, you could certainly see him approach 30 minutes again, but he definitely doesn't have to if he's not playing really well. He's up to 4K. There's not really much from this team that stands out. Cade Cunningham certainly gives you a ceiling, but you're also paying for it. Isaiah Stewart's likely to play 30 minutes if he stays out of foul trouble, but he's also 5,700. So I think most likely I'll take some shots at Saddiq Bey and just hope that he plays well and plays several more minutes than he did in the last game when he was playing poorly. But other than that, I don't see too much. I know Saban Lee had a big game last game. He played 28 minutes, but that was also just a weird rotation where Killian Hayes got benched basically early in the third quarter.
And Killian Hayes has also been dealing with a thumb injury, and that's been something that's kind of changed his minutes around a little bit, where there's been a few games where, hey, Killian Hayes is out, and then Killian Hayes leaves with an injury. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened during last game, is his thumb was bothering him, and he had to sit out for stretches of the game. But there's so many guards now that are getting minutes on this Pistons team. And by the way, none of them are particularly good. And it's just kind of hard to parse who's going to be getting the minutes. I suspect there's a pretty good chance that one of these guys has a ceiling game and scores 25 to 30 DraftKings points or FanDuel points. But I don't know which one it's going to be. And you've got Amadou Diallo, Saban Lee, Killian Hayes, Frank Jackson, Josh Jackson playing minutes, Corey Joseph. Any of these guys can end up playing 20 plus minutes and playing well. And I don't know that I need to take stabs on it based on some of the other value we have on the slate. Cade Cunningham, given the price tag on him, I know you mentioned he has a ceiling, but considering what his salary is, do you think you're going to end up getting up to him today?
Probably not too much. I think the most appealing thing about the Pistons, if there is one, is it goes back to what you were saying. If any of these guys play well, there are plenty more minutes for them to play than their average. So when you look at like their average projections, they all look pretty bad. On these cheaper guys, with it only being a 4-game slate, typically, I would say that there is some appeal in just kind of taking shots at the lowest owned ones. It's not a situation where you and I can sit here and figure out which one's going to do well. It literally just comes down to, you know, whose shot is falling and they'll get more minutes. But at the same time, with Brooklyn being on this slate and with the Knicks being on this slate, that's still just sort of not totally necessary.
Yeah, and I kind of feel a lot of the same thoughts about the Pacers on the other side of this game. Sabonis has become a little bit more expensive. Karis LeVert was really good for a while, and I was rostering him at really low ownership, but he's become more expensive as well. The guy that stands out the most to me here is Malcolm Brogdon. If you're looking on the cheaper end, Chris Duarte, but nobody's an exceptional points per dollar play.
No, I do think Indiana, though, becomes appealing just in the sense that there's plenty of value on this slate. So you can take some of the raw points that these guys offer. Karis LeVert's been playing a lot of minutes. He played 32 minutes last game, lost about 3 to 4 minutes to garbage time at the end. In competitive games, you've typically been getting around 36 minutes from him. One thing to note that they didn't do last game, Karis LeVert did not run with the second unit now that Justin Holiday was back. That is a big deal for him because his rates really take a hit, as you would expect, when he's playing alongside Sabonis and Brogdon. When it's just Sabonis and Brogdon's on the bench, LeVert actually has a 32% usage rate this year. So him getting those, 10, 11 minutes when Brogdon's not playing was really, really valuable. But now with Justin Holiday back, they went back to LeVert not running with the second unit, which is a problem. So the minutes should be there, but the price tag is up. And I do think there's reason to think he produces at a little bit lower rate than we've seen in those last few games. Brogdon, Sabonis, likely to play a bunch of minutes. They're expensive, but again, there's going to be plenty of value you can get to them from a raw point standpoint. Brogdon in particular at 8,400, I think looks good. He's also getting ownership at 24%. And then Miles Turner has been playing a ton of minutes for a while now. He played 30 minutes last night, lost about 3 minutes to garbage time. He's still reasonably priced at 6,700. This is a spot where he has plenty of upside against Detroit's front court. So I think Brogdon and Turner are the two easiest pieces to get to. If you get to some Sabonis, that's fine. LeVert and Duarte are okay as well. Brissett still, he played 23 minutes last night, but he also got garbage time. So I think with Justin Holiday back, you're likely to see around 20 minutes from Oshae Brissett.
Yeah, and then also one follow-up question on Karis LeVert, because he's become more expensive on DK at 7,500. Still only 6,200 on FanDuel. I assume that's going to end up making him fairly popular today. If Karis LeVert does end up being a popular play at 6,200 on FanDuel, how would you view him in that scenario when you pointed out some of the concerns you have with him not getting as much run with the second unit?
Yeah, I mean, on FanDuel, it's still fine because the salary is so cheap. Just the one thing I would point out is, like you said, there's probably going to be quite a bit of ownership there. Right now, we have him getting 36% on FanDuel, which makes him the sixth highest owned guy on the slate. You're still talking about someone who, when Sabonis and Brogdon are active, averages about like 0.87 to 0.9 FanDuel points per minute. Even if he does play 35 minutes, like that's a good score, but it's certainly beatable. If all he does is have an average performance over 35, 36 minutes, you're not going to be upset with it, but it's still beatable. It's still a situation where it very easily can be a case where, the field just has this kind of average play. And then there's always the chance that he does poorly and you're in a really good spot if he doesn't get there.
Yeah. So anything else to add from this game? I don't think it's one of the most appealing DFS games on the slate, but I do prefer the Pacer side.
Yeah, I prefer the Pacers side for sure. Chris Duarte is also pretty cheap. He, as expected, loses production with everyone healthy. He's likely to play, 28 to 30 minutes, but getting a little bit of ownership, which probably just there's a lot of value I would rather get to, but also there's only 4 games to choose from.
All right. And the next game to talk about is the Philadelphia 76ers at the Brooklyn Nets. Now, from the Philadelphia side of the game, we've got Joel Embiid finally starting to play better. I know he missed that other game the other day due to the rib injury, but more than anything, I think that was tail end of a back-to-back, or actually, was that even? No, it wasn't even a back-to-back situation. It just seemed more like it was kind of a planned rest type thing for Joel Embiid. Do you have any concerns with him today, considering that it's the tail end of a back-to-back for Philly?
I was going to say, I don't have concerns in the sense that, if he's in and he's starting, I'm not worried about it. My bigger concern is that you could just see the Sixers do some dumb stuff as we get close to lock. I actually have a couple of concerns with this team. One is that they mess around with Embiid. Two is that we know that they have at least Niang. I don't remember if there was more than one player in health and safety protocols. It has seemed recently like once there's one or two, there starts to be 3, 4, and 5 really quickly. So this is definitely a team where you could just see some stuff happen, between now and lock. But as it looks right now, if they say Embiid's playing, whatever, I'm just going to assume he plays his normal 34 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I think something else that's kind of interesting if you look at the pricing here, with this being a tail end of a back-to-back, it does look like FanDuel and DraftKings were both a little proactive pricing Andre Drummond. He's $7K on DK, $6,100 on FanDuel. So it does look like they've prepared for a situation where, hey, Joel Embiid doesn't always play in back-to-backs. We don't want to have another situation where we have a min-priced Andre Drummond who's 90% owned. So they've gone ahead and priced him up. Now, I know that for right now, we're just assuming Joel Embiid plays, but since it's back-to-back, let's talk about this potential situation. If he sits, would a 7,000 price tag for Andre Drummond on DK, 6,100 on FanDuel, would that still be an enticing salary? Yeah,
I think it would still be one of the best plays on the slate. It's not, it's obviously, it comes with more risk than when he was like 4,700 or whatever, but you would still expect him to play a lot of minutes here. He started 11 games this year. He's averaged 28 minutes per game, 1.21 DraftKings points per minute. He would still look very, very good.
Yeah, so I think Andre Drummond, we've seen sometimes the minutes wane for him when he's been moved into a starting role. Last start that he had against Memphis, the game was a blowout, but he only ended up playing 21 minutes. Start before that, played 27. Overall, as a starter this year, he is playing 28 minutes per game, but averaging well over 30 fantasy points. So I would have no issue paying that kind of price tag for him. Tobias Harris is only $7,100 on FanDuel, but he's been priced up to $8,700 on DK. Just assuming Joel Embiid is in, how much of a priority, if at all, would Tobias Harris be for you on this slate?
If Embiid is in, I think it's pretty tough to get to Harris at 8,700. Seems like they did the same thing with him that they did with Drummond, where, if Embiid's in, he should be like a $7,500, $7,600 guy, but instead he's 8,700. So it's going to be pretty difficult to get there. I think he did play 37 minutes last night. That is something that I expected with Niang out, that you would see a few more minutes for Tobias Harris. So that's good, but it certainly doesn't justify an $1,100 price increase.
And then there's one other player that I think is marginally interesting for this slate. And so, as mentioned, George Niang out. He's in the COVID protocol. We've got Furkan Korkmaz. He's questionable play. He's dealing with a non-COVID illness. If Korkmaz is out in addition to Niang, is Thibault somebody you could see yourself getting to at 3,100 on DK? The 4,200 on FanDuel is a little more pricey, but I think we could see over 20 minutes from Thibault, and that would make him a viable punt option for me without Korkmaz.
Yeah, like he's playable. He only played 14 minutes as a starter yesterday, but this is a game where I would expect, like, if he can stay out of foul trouble, the Sixers should want him out there for every minute that Kevin Durant's out there. So I think that the minutes certainly could be there. He's still not a very good fantasy producer. There's still plenty of other value, but if he starts and if Korkmaz is also out, he obviously doesn't have to play a lot of minutes. We just saw last game, but he certainly could, get 30 plus.
And then anybody else that you could see potentially being a viable cheap option from the Sixers if there is no Korkmaz?
If there is no Korkmaz, I think it's worth mentioning Tyrese Maxey played 42 minutes last night. This is something that we had seen earlier in the season when the Sixers were shorthanded, that Maxey just would play close to the entire game, and then you would spread the wing minutes out to other guys. So not that you would project him for 42, but if Korkmaz is in, I think that Maxey Korkmaz is out. I think it's likely that Maxey, plays at least into the upper 30s again.
All right, now we can move on to the Nets situation. And here are the list of players that are out for the Nets. And this is everybody, including the non-COVID situation, because Joe Harris is out. And then I won't even include Kyrie here. But with Joe Harris out and the COVID situation, there's so few players available for the Nets. LaMarcus Aldridge out, Javon Carter out, Paul Millsap out, Bruce Brown out, DeAndre Bembry out, James Harden out, James Johnson out. They've signed Langston Galloway to a 10-day contract just to help fill out the roster and eat up some minutes. In itself, that would not seem to really be important, but here's why it is to me. Now that Langston Galloway is in the mix, I don't expect we're going to be able to see massive minutes out of guys like David Duke or massive minutes out of Kessler Edwards or Cam Thomas. And these guys were players last game. It's not like they were players who I was like, oh, David Duke is the best fantasy producer in the world. It was more a situation like these minutes for the Nets have to go somewhere. I just want to get exposure to Duke, Edwards, Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe. How does Langston Galloway in the picture change that situation?
So I think that Galloway being there, those guys still look like good values. I'm not expecting Galloway to just come in and play 30 minutes or anything, but it does sort of, it makes them a little bit riskier for sure, because for one, their salaries increased a little bit. You don't have Edwards at 3K. Now he's 4K. If he played 40 minutes again, then he'd look good. But it just makes him riskier because for one, like there was no guarantee he plays that many minutes again. Anyway, you had David Duke in some foul trouble, which benefited Edwards. You had Edwards playing really well, which certainly isn't a guarantee. Like it wouldn't have been surprising if Edwards only played 24 minutes today anyway, but adding Galloway makes it so the minutes are even more volatile. Same goes for David Duke. I think basically it just makes it so the guys that were already in the rotation, I think still play a ton of minutes. It makes the David Duke, Kessler Edwards pieces a lot riskier. You can still get there at cheap price tags, but they are just a little bit riskier. It's one more body where you can get, I guess basically the way I look at it is if they only had the 8 bodies. So like last game, you had Cam Thomas was the one that really, really disappointed, right? And he's the one that I think was probably the safest going in just because he was actually a part of the rotation. But it would be really difficult for more than one of David Duke, Cam Thomas, and Kessler Edwards not to play huge minutes if only 8 guys were available. Now with Galloway, there's the potential at least for 2 of those guys to disappoint.
Yeah, and then something else I'll add too is I think Cam Thomas is a really strong GPP play today, and I know that Jordan's going to be excited about it. Jordan thinks Cam Thomas future Hall of Famer. That's his favorite player in the entire NBA. Jordan's been playing Cam Thomas the entire season in his DFS lineup. So the other day when Nets first got rolled out, Jordan in our group chat was like, "Hey, it's Cam Thomas time." It ended up it was not Cam Thomas time. I think today could be Cam Thomas time. The same reasons that people rostered him last late, I think there's the same reasons to roster him today. The difference is people are just not going to want to play him at anywhere close to the same clip after what happened last game. So I think this could be one of those good bounce back troll spots where it's, hey, there's still these minutes available for the Nets. Cam Thomas has still played well when he's been on the court over the course of the season. So I do like Cam Thomas more than guys like David Duke, Langston. Well, Langston Galloway is only in the FanDuel player pool, not on DraftKings. Kessler Edwards, just because, like you said before, he's been in the rotation this year. He just didn't play as well as those guys last game. I think he's going to get the opportunity, and he is my favorite of those cheap plays today from a tournament perspective.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is right now the ownership projections essentially just reflect who did well last game, which is close to meaningless. David, and I'm not saying David Duke at 4,200 is a bad play or Kessler Edwards at 4K is a bad play, but this is a situation like we talk about this a lot at the beginning of the season. You don't just abandon your priors because of how one game plays out. There's no reason that you should look at the last game and say, oh, Cam Thomas is only going to play 22 minutes because Cam Thomas was playing more than that when they were healthier than this. He just played really, really poorly. I think he shot like 2 for 10 or something. Kessler Edwards was making everything. David Duke was playing pretty well, aside from the fouls. So it was just a situation where Thomas kind of played his way off the floor, but he's been ahead of both of those guys in the rotation all season long. There's no reason that the Nets, that Steve Nash is saying, hey, we just lost all of our guys. When we were healthy, we really like what Cam Thomas gives us, but now that we're not healthy, we're going to play these worse guys ahead of him. So there's no reason to think that if Cam Thomas isn't playing well, or is playing well off the bench, that he's not going to get 30 plus minutes here. And right now ownership is just kind of completely reflective of what we saw last game.
Yeah, and it's funny too because last game Cam Thomas, I don't remember the exact numbers, but he was like 60% owned, and then you had Kessler Edwards was 2%, David Duke was 20% just because he was starting, Day'Ron Sharpe, he was like 3% owned, and now all of a sudden it's like, hey, just based on the results from last game, we're totally we don't know anything about these guys. Right. None of us are that opinionated on David Duke, maybe we have some opinions on, but so David Duke, Day'Ron Sharpe, Kessler Edwards. These are guys that as basketball players, we didn't really draw strong conclusions of. Now we're just looking at a one game sample size and be like, oh, this is who these guys are now. I just think that I want to play of these guys, whoever the lesser owned, because it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of my approach last slate too. I played a ton of Cam Thomas because I thought that it was pretty difficult for him not to get there, which obviously he failed miserably. But talking about Kessler Edwards and Day'Ron Sharpe, I ended up not getting any Kessler Edwards, and I was surprised. It's because we had projected him for 15% ownership, and he was 2% owned. So it was just, just a situation where that was off, and that's why I didn't get there. But when I was assuming he was going to be low owned, I was like, oh, I definitely want to play Kessler Edwards because I don't expect much from him, but I don't know. Nobody knows. And I had a good amount of Day'Ron Sharpe because he's a really good fantasy producer on a per minute basis. And it's just like, I don't know if he's going to play 12 minutes or 18 minutes, but if he plays 18, he's probably smashing a 3K price tag and nobody's rostering him. So it's the same kind of thing here where, going into that last slate, it was Sharpe and Edwards that nobody was going to roster. Now it's Thomas and Sharpe. And, at the same time, Thomas is more expensive than those other guys as well. So that plays into it, but it's not like getting the 4,700 from 4,200 on this slate is going to be that difficult. I really just want to embrace the volatility here and accept, there's going to be people 100% that insist that they know what the Nets rotation is going to look like tonight. And they don't, because it's going to, for most of these guys, it's going to depend on how they're playing, how many minutes they play. So it's just saying, okay, look, the field is going to take a stand somewhere. They're going to be more confident than they should in how this plays out. I'll just take the lower owned guys. If it doesn't work out in my favor, then, I don't win a GPP that day. That's most days anyway.
So the cheap guys, those are a little harder parse until we get to Nick Claxton, although he's a vastly different play on FanDuel versus DraftKings. 3,900 on DK, 5,900 on FanDuel. I'm going to start by saying this. Nick Claxton's probably going to be really popular on DK today. We have him projected for, let's see, most recent run of ownership. We have Nick Claxton projected for 38% ownership on DraftKings. That's a number that I would be overweight to the field to if the slate locked right now. FanDuel is going to be a different situation, 5,900. But first, I'll ask you about Claxton, his DK price. Do you think that he's the best value play on the slate?
Yeah. He's a good fantasy producer. He's likely to give you mid-20s in minutes. If I had to make a case against him, though, I don't think it's that difficult. It would be that he still only played 26 minutes last game. They did not give, at least according to Popcorn Machine, which I'm not positive is correct, but they did not play, like, they didn't give 48 minutes to Claxton and Sharp. You got some Blake Griffin at the 5 as well. So if Claxton is, when he's playing well, if he's only going to play like 25 minutes, that's a little bit of a problem. Then you throw in the Joel Embiid / Andre Drummond foul risk, which, not that you're going to not play someone because you're afraid they're going to foul, but there's a pretty good chance he fouls. I do think there's still even some volatility there on Claxton. I think that the ownership on him on DraftKings makes sense, but I will say that I don't think there should be a 40-1 gap between him and Daron Sharp.
Yeah, I think that is certainly sensible. And then in terms of Kevin Durant, what are we going to say here? If you have the roster space, if you have the salary cap for him, you're spending up for Kevin Durant. With no James Harden in the picture, he's going to be taking as many shots as he possibly can. The only way I would be considering not getting to as much Kevin Durant as possible on the slate is if Jokic was on the slate. And Jokic isn't on the slate. So just Durant to me is the no-brainer pay-up option.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't even view it as like, if I have the money to get there, I'm going to have the money to get there. I'm going to figure out the rest later. You're right. If you had Giannis on the slate, if you had Jokic on the slate, those guys compete in terms of points per minute with what Durant does without Harden on the floor. They're not on the slate. There's no real other pay up spots. Embiid, I guess, but Embiid, as good as he is, he's like a 1.5 fantasy point per minute guy. Durant, going back to last year without Harden and Irving on the floor, is around 1.75 fantasy points per minute. He's also likely to play more minutes than Embiid. Even yesterday, like, Embiid played 37 minutes. Durant played 43 in regulation last game. He played 48 minutes total. There's just a very good chance Durant plays 40 plus minutes tonight as the clear best per minute guy on the slate. I don't really see how to get away from him, especially if he's only going to, like, he's projected to be 48% owned right now. I don't know if maybe that goes up between now and lock, but he could be 65%, and I'd still want to have him pretty much everywhere.
All right. The next game on the slate is Knicks and Houston. But first, shout out to our sponsor, PrizePicks. If you guys are unfamiliar with PrizePicks, we have great tools that you could use to find the best prop odds over on PrizePicks for free on Awesemo.com using OddsShopper. We have all of our NBA projections just in our model for over-unders on player props. We have expected ROI, expected chance of win. Compare those to the numbers over at PrizePicks, where you could build some really nice player prop cards. Also, if you're signing up at PrizePicks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo and you get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. And that also gets you 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So you'll get all the access that you have to our tools, which you use to make money in DFS, make money over on PrizePicks, and using that promo code also get up to $100 bonus, like I said, on your first deposit. All right, so getting over to the Knicks game now. For the Knicks right now, Quentin Grimes in COVID protocols. We've got RJ Barrett out. Obi Toppin's out. We've got Kevin Knox out. I think that there's an opportunity here for some Knicks guys who are going a little bit under the radar to have a big game. One of them in particular that stands out to me that nobody's going to want to hear about is Evan Fournier, because Fournier is not picking up that much ownership right now. He has absolutely sucked over the last couple of weeks, but he played 29 minutes last game. And I think the possibility that we're getting around 30 minutes from Evan Fournier at a fairly cheap price point on FanDuel and DK and not picking up much ownership, I really like him as a tournament option. Do you have any opinion on Fournier?
No, I mean, I'm there with you. He's getting 13% ownership on DraftKings, but I went this route. The first edition of my Contrarian Tournament Plays video series was on that short slate where we didn't have the Nets news yet, so I was stuck talking about like Evan Fournier. I'm surprised it didn't get canceled after the first shot, but it's the same kind of thing here. The Knicks are extremely shorthanded. It's a very good matchup against Houston. The thing that stands out to me about the Knicks is, so Kevin Knox played 20 minutes last game. Miles McBride played 20 minutes. A lot of the main pieces actually didn't play as many minutes as they could. Evan Fournier only played 28.9 minutes. He didn't play at all in the fourth quarter. Emmanuel Quickly only played 21.6 minutes. So taking Knox out, I think the first thing that happens is Quickly and or Fournier play more minutes. Derrick Rose is already at 34. Alec Burks was already at 39. Julius Randle was already at 37. Probably not going to go up much from those numbers, but Fournier Quickly could play more. They closed with a small lineup with Julius Randle at the 5. So you could see more minutes for the combination of Noel and Robinson potentially to soak up some of those Kevin Knox minutes. I think that the Knicks are kind of weird in that normally when you lose a player like Knox and makes the team even more shorthanded, you're looking to like that last piece on the bench. But I think you're actually looking here to the guys that were already in the rotation and sort of had played fewer minutes than they could have last game. Fournier is one of them. Points around 0.75 FanDuel point or DraftKings points per minute this year. He's terrible, but he's not that popular. It is a good matchup. He's likely to play more minutes here. Same goes for Quickly, except for the being terrible part. Same goes for Robinson and Noel, likely to just get more minutes because they're more shorthanded.
Yeah, and then also looking at the current run of ownership, we've got a lot of the Knicks here are super popular. Over on FanDuel, Alec Burks projected to be in over 50% of lineups. Derrick Rose projected for 41% ownership. Julius Randle projected for 39%. That is on FanDuel. On DK, Derrick Rose projected for 37% ownership. Julius Randle projected for 30%. Alec Burks at 7,100 on DK is projected for 23% ownership. Would you be looking to play Alec Burks at 7,100 with that much ownership on DK? Because I just haven't been playing a whole lot of Burks lately, because to me, he's been overpriced and overowned.
Yeah, I mean, 23%, I think if he's going to play 40 minutes is reasonable. He is expensive, but he's still like a 0.9 to 1 fantasy point per minute guy on average. Now you get a fast-paced Houston team that doesn't defend, and he's probably going to play 40 minutes. So I think the ownership makes sense. I'd be surprised if I ended up like playing more than that, but I don't think it's a spot where I'm likely to really be getting away from it either.
And then as a pay up option with Julius Randle, I think he's certainly going to be in my player pool. I expect him to come in underweight to the field on him, though, where he's in 30% of the field's lineups on DK, on FanDuel, where he's currently projected for that 40% ownership number. If I'm really trying to get Kevin Durant into all of my lineups, or at the very least most of my lineups, that's just going to kind of pinch the amount that I can get to Julius Randle, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. Like 30% going to Julius Randle, perfectly fine with that. Like, I love Randle here. He's going to play a ton of minutes. It's a great spot. What it really comes down to, though, is how easy does it end up being to get Durant plus Randle into lineups? If I can do that, pretty easily and rotate through some cheap pieces, then I will, because I think Randle looks great. But I'm not going to be sacrificing Kevin Durant to get Julius Randle.
Yeah, and a lot of people, by the way, who are really big on talking about how much Evan Fournier sucks right now. Totally agree. Evan Fournier sucks, but him sucking this much is kind of the reason I like him. If he didn't suck, people would be rostering him. And there's so much opportunity for the Knicks, and the opportunity to me is more important than anything else. We just mentioned all these guys that are out for the Knicks: Grimes, Toppin, Knox, Barrett. There's a lot of minutes to go around. Are they for sure going Evan Fournier? No, but the Knicks just gave him a massive contract in the offseason. He did play fairly well early in the season, which is kind of forgotten at this point. But we've got a guy in Fournier who's cheap. The price has gone down since the start of the season. There's extra opportunity. I care more about the opportunity than how well somebody's played in the last few games.
Yeah, and you know who else sucks? David Duke Jr., Kessler Edwards, Cameron Thomas, like these other guys that we're going to be playing at similar prices.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is everybody's like, hey, how about David Duke? Who's, let's see, what's the current ownership on him? He is right now he's $6,100 on FanDuel and picking up ownership. That is absolutely crazy. On DK, we've got David Duke Jr. at projected for 40% ownership at 4,200. Evan Fournier is 4,900 and projected for 13% ownership. Can anybody with a straight face say that you're confident David Duke Jr. is a better basketball player, fantasy producer than Evan Fournier? We've seen him play one game, and Evan Fournier is somebody the Knicks just signed to a $75 million contract. Now, that doesn't mean that just because he signed that big contract that he's good, but in general, if you asked anybody a week ago, would you rather have Evan Fournier or David Duke Jr. on your basketball team? People are picking Evan Fournier. So I think that's the lens to kind of look at this through.
Yeah. And someone I think just made the point, which I was going to say also, it doesn't seem too hard to fit Durant and Randle on DraftKings. I agree with that. You have the really cheap Nick Claxton that helps out, but also two of what look like right now, at least my favorite tournament plays on the slate: Noel 4,200, Robinson 4,300. They'll help you bring down that cost as well. Obviously don't like those guys together, but with Knox out, I just think there's a very good chance that you get back to 48 minutes from Noel and Robinson, and they're both cheap in a really good spot. You could see Robinson just go absolutely nuts with the second unit against Houston.
All right, let's head on over to the Houston Rockets side of the game, where we have to talk about Şengün, who is once again looking like he's going to be a pretty popular play today. He's priced at 5,500 on DK. On FanDuel, he's priced at 5,800. and he is the chalk of the slate on DraftKings. 50% projected over ownership for Şengün, most popular player on the slate. 40% over on FanDuel. I love Şengün. I think that Şengün is probably the best player on the Houston Rockets right now. And I don't even know how much of a hot take that is.
That's
I think he's the most.
Take.
I think he's the best. He's the best, most talented player on the team. You know who seems to disagree with this though? Yeah, exactly. The Houston Rockets coaching staff. If I knew for sure that Şengün was starting playing 30 minutes a day, something along those lines, I want to get to him a ton. But I just don't know that's going to be the case. And he seems to be really reliant on garbage time to pick up a lot of his fantasy production and minutes. And that's a concern for me. He plays 28 minutes yesterday. He scores 46.7 fantasy points. Obviously, that's tremendous results. But I'm really concerned that we're going to get to the end of this game and be like, how come Şengün only played 18 minutes? So I think that's why this is a sliding scale and why I want to be underweight to the field on him. There's no Kevin Porter Jr., there's no Christian Wood, there's no Jalen Green, there's no Daniel House. There's opportunity there. I'm just not sold that he's going to get the minutes, and I don't know that he's worth being 50% owned on DraftKings.
Yeah, that's what I'm having trouble with as well, is really the ownership, because I love Şengün. It was the same thing yesterday where he was cheaper. He was $1,000 less on DraftKings. And he looked great, but assuming he comes off the bench, he still has not played a single minute alongside Daniel Theis this year. So we saw Theis play 18 minutes. He subbed out pretty early in the third. Yesterday, I wasn't too worried about Şengün's minutes because I knew that he'd play. Like there was a chance that you would get like a 26-minute, 22 for Theis, 26 for Şengün, something like that anyway. But if there was garbage time, he was going to play, and Cleveland was extremely likely to just destroy the Rockets. Here, you have Houston at home against a shorthanded Knicks team. The Knicks are only 6-point favorites. You could actually get a real closing lineup from the Rockets. Şengün absolutely should be in that lineup. I have no idea if he will be. He played 9 minutes in the first half yesterday. I think my best guess at this rotation is that he just naturally plays more minutes in the second half, because I think that you get two first half rotations from Theis. He opens the third and then he doesn't come back. So my best guess is that you get still a 22 for Theis, 26 for Şengün, something like that. But that's not set in stone. We haven't seen a closing lineup, how this plays out. We've seen Theis start some games recently where he only plays 3 stints. And that's what I'm basing my guess off of, in addition to the fact that Şengün's better than him and that they should want Şengün to play more minutes. But we haven't seen Christian Wood was in those games. So we haven't seen what the closing lineup for Stephen Silas looks like if the game's competitive at the end. It could be a 4th stint for Daniel Theis. It shouldn't be. I don't think it will be. It could be. And, 50% ownership going to Şengün is basically everybody saying, yeah, that can't happen. And it definitely could.
Yeah, as a fantasy producer, points per minute, Şengün is ridiculously good. And at this point, honestly, I would be surprised if Şengün doesn't make an all-star game at some point in his career. He's been that impressive to me, which just doesn't matter if he isn't getting the minutes. And the last few games, he's been playing out of his mind. He played 23 minutes, 25, 28 yesterday. And like you said, he only played 9 in the first half. If that game wasn't a blowout where the Rocks ended up losing, the final score is 124-89, he very well could have, or maybe even probably would have played under 20 minutes in that game. So cash games, you're playing Şengün because he's going to be really popular, really high points per minute production. For tournaments, though, I'm going to be underweight to the field on him unless he starts. If he starts, then I'll feel a little bit more confident in his minutes. But off the bench, it's just hard for me to really confidently say that we're getting big minutes out of Şengün. This to me feels like a spot where Silas going to be like, hey, we're just going to play this guy 18 minutes for no reason at all.
There's 2 other things that I want. So I agree. If he starts, all of this changes because it's just a signal that he's getting starter, 30, 28, at least 28 or 30 minutes. If he starts, just kind of, I don't care about the ownership. But the other thing I will mention, and, because we talk a lot about, not getting bogged down in individual player ownership so much as your entire lineup. Right now, with some of the ownership that we've seen, I think I can still get to a lot of Şengün because I can play Daron Sharp at 1%. I can play Mitchell Robinson at no ownership. I can play Nerlens Noel at no ownership. I can do stuff like that I'm perfectly fine with. Cam Thomas at 3%. I can do stuff like that. I'm perfectly fine taking shots on those guys to get Şengün into the lineup. And to go back to chat talking about, who sucks and who doesn't. This is one of the big reasons that ownership really matters, is it allows you to play the guys that don't suck like Şengün. If you're just going to, if in volatile situations like the Nets, you're going to say, oh, I know David Duke's good. Cool. You just took a 33% owned guy that has a huge range of outcomes, and it's going to limit the actual good players that you can get to later. So with the ownership we've seen so far, I do think that I can make some really strong lineups that have Şengün. The problem is if that ownership starts to change as the day goes on, like if Duke goes from 35% to 20% and Thomas goes from 3 to 15 or something, then it's like, okay, well, how am I getting different here? But the way things look right now, I do think I can still get the Şengün a good amount.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally reasonable way to look at it as well. But if you're playing Şengün with Durant, David Duke Jr., Claxton, Derrick Rose, cool, that's what everybody else is doing as well. And then it's just going to be really hard to differentiate your lineups. Anything else from the Houston Rockets here that stand out to you? I think Şengün's really the main talking point.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the main talking point for sure. Jae'Sean Tate's played well without Porter or Wood on the floor this year. He missed his final stint last game. He's probably going to play around 30 minutes tonight. Not a whole lot that stands out. I mean, Kenyon Martin certainly has a path to decent minutes here, but I don't see a ton. Şengün's pretty clearly the top guy.
Yeah, I'm looking at other guys. There's nobody else. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll say Eric Gordon at 5,600 actually is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, there's nobody else when looking on the initial builds that I've made where I'm getting to a whole bunch from Houston. It's just Şengün's really the interesting talking point. I have no clue what I'm going to do with them from a minute standpoint or try to project minutes. It's just guesswork. There's no way to know for sure what it's going to look like. Moving on to the Washington Wizards, we have Spencer Dinwiddie out for rest, with this being the tail end of a back-to-back. So with that in mind, who is the cheap player you think benefits the most here? We've seen Aaron Holiday start and play bigger minutes at times. We've seen Hotwell Neto play a bigger role off the bench in times where we've seen no Spencer Dinwiddie. I think one of these guys is likely to be a good points per dollar play today, but which one of them do you prefer?
So Holiday, I expect to start. Neto's the better fantasy producer. Right now, Neto's also getting more ownership at 15%. So I think like if Holiday starts and is lower owned, then I would rather go there. But Neto's the one, like if everything ends up being equal, like if Holiday's starting, but the ownership's the same or Holiday's higher owned, I like going to Neto. One thing to point out though, Denny Avdia could sneakily be the guy that really benefits here. Like he's been playing really well lately. They want to get him more run. They could easily close with Beal at point.
Yeah, it's possible. Recent games for Denny. One thing that it's just the minutes haven't been there for him. I get it. It's different today with there not being any Spencer Dinwiddie in the picture. But overall for the season, it's not like he's the best fantasy producer in the world. We've seen him have one game with over 26 fantasy points this year. And he did start a couple of games for them, and those didn't go particularly well. The game against the Utah Jazz, which ended up being a big battle between me and YouTube chat that day because everybody wanted to play Denny and I was not going to be on him. And then I was doing the live afterlock show and he got off to a really quick start. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed on social media for this. And then he just didn't score fantasy points in the second half. So the last two games he started, 23 minutes, 17 DraftKings points, 16 and a half minutes, 16 DraftKings points. I just struggle to wrap my head around the idea that we're going to see extended minutes from Denny when it just hasn't been there this year. Yeah,
I mean, I think like he played 22 and a half yesterday. He was in the closing lineup for that game. But yeah, it's just like I want to pay attention to the ownership there because like right now we have Neto at 14%. We have Holiday at 6%. We have Avdia at 1%. In 4 games without Dinwiddie this year, Neto has averaged 20.9 minutes per game. So, and he's averaged 0.82 DraftKings points per minute. So that's fine at a really cheap price tag, but it's not like anything special. Aaron Holiday has averaged 24 minutes per game, 0.69 DraftKings points per minute. So same kind of thing, just, mediocre production. Like Avdia can beat any of those. So if there ends up being a big ownership gap, I don't mind taking my chances that the Wizards try and find a way to get Avdia more minutes. They have also, at the same time, though, they have seemed to like Aaron Holiday in the fourth quarter a bit. He helped bring them back against Denver a couple of games ago, kind of came out of nowhere and then played in the fourth. Yesterday, they did the same sort of thing against Sacramento. He played the first 4.5 minutes of the fourth, but that was more of a normal rotation. They were just talking about a little bit on the broadcast about potentially him being someone they trust in the fourth. So not something that would normally matter when the team's healthy, but maybe you do see him down the stretch. So my only point here is that there's still volatility, but not only between Neto and Holiday, but also I think Avdia is in the mix as well.
Yep, I think that is totally sensible. And then, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, he could be somebody else who plays extended minutes. as a pay-up option, Bradley Beal's been pretty disappointing from a fantasy perspective this year. I thought he was going to have a massive fantasy year without Russell Westbrook in the picture, but it just hasn't been the case. It's been a much more balanced offense than expected. I don't mind getting up to Bradley Beal today because he is priced down a little bit on DK and FanDuel relative to where we saw him at times last year. Tough matchup against the Phoenix Suns, so I think he's fine as a secondary pay-up option, but not a massively high priority. Where do you stand with Beal?
Pretty much the same spot. He doesn't get any sort of massive bump without Spencer Dinwiddie. You're still expecting him to play 36 minutes or so, 32% usage rate. Fast-paced Phoenix team, but also a very solid defensive team. I think that it's going to be tough to get there. Pay attention to the ownership. Like if it's at 18% on DraftKings right now. If it comes down a bit, it starts to look more appealing. But he's kind of in that same boat with Julius Randle, where like I'm not sacrificing Kevin Durant to get the Bradley Beal. I would rather play Randle than Beal, but he is getting like 1.5 times the ownership. So if that gap gets wider, then maybe Beal starts to look appealing as essentially a Randle pivot. But I think Randle also pretty clearly ahead of him.
All right, so getting to the Phoenix Suns side of the game, and this is what is going to close out the show for us. So guys, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and there's going to be a lot more NBA content coming up later today. Adam's doing his GPP tournament videos, which you guys should be checking out. We also do our injury report video where we just kind of summarize all the injuries that have happened, and I assume that there's a pretty good chance that more injuries will get added to the injury report later today, and also deeper dive live before lock. So subscribe to the channel so you know when all that content gets posted. But now the Phoenix Suns side of the game, DeAndre Ayton had been questionable for a bunch of games in a row. He's back now, so that takes JaVale McGee out of the picture. Chris Paul has been priced way up on DK and FanDuel at 86 and 9,700. I think a lot of these guys are about fairly priced, but nothing to me looks like an exceptional value. So is there anybody on the Suns that's a high priority play for you today?
No, pretty much just everybody priced where they should be. One thing I did want to check. So last game, Cameron Payne played 30 minutes in regulation or 29 minutes in regulation in a game where Chris Paul played 36 minutes with DeAndre Ayton in. That's a really big deal. We had seen Payne playing more minutes alongside Chris Paul when Ayton was out. And I thought there was a good chance that it could just be because they were running, more. You had Jalen Smith out, you had Ayton out, so you were getting more Crowder / Cameron Johnson at the 5, and as a result, they were more willing to play Payne alongside Paul. They played Payne alongside Paul quite a bit last game. Payne is a very good per minute fantasy producer when he's on the floor. He's 5,200, so it's a situation where if he goes back to playing 22, 23 minutes, he probably isn't going to bail you out at that price. When he was 4,400, it was nice. It was like, okay, if he plays 20 minutes, I'm fine. If he plays more, I look great. So there is more risk here, but these recent rotations for Cameron Payne have been very appealing.
Yeah, I think that is, with that in mind, I probably didn't give Cameron Payne enough minutes when I was doing an initial look at this morning. But yeah, 34 minutes for him last game. It's hard for me to expect those same amount of minutes. Although with that said, the game against the Clippers, he played 29 minutes, but the final score was 111 to 95. The game against Boston, he played 22 minutes. The score was 111 to 90. So those weren't particularly competitive games. I think maybe I'm overlooking the results there. And I think maybe I should be giving him closer to 30 minutes in this spot. What do you think is the most likely range of outcomes for the playing time for Cameron Payne here?
I think going to like a 26-minute projection is very reasonable. He played about 13 and a half minutes in the first half last game. There's still volatility in these minutes because like if you could still get Landry Shamet closing. There's some times where Cam Johnson could be in the closing lineup. You assume, so basically Paul, Bridges, Ayton, or McGee, but you assume Ayton are going to be in the closing lineup. So there's two spots essentially for Cameron Payne, Cameron Johnson, Landry Shamet, Jay Crowder. If Payne's playing well, he certainly should be in there, but there's still going to be times where he isn't and he loses out. The ownership is also there. We haven't projected a 27% ownership right now. But I think like 26 minutes is pretty fair. Whereas prior to the last few games, I was typically going like 22.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to up my minutes projection with Cameron Payne a little bit. My initial run, I wasn't really getting to him, but now I think I'll give him a couple extra minutes. I'll probably get me to Cameron Payne a little bit more. Anything else here from the Suns stand out to you?
Not really. I mean, Ayton played a ton in his first game back. That was good to see. Salary is pretty expensive on DraftKings at 8,800. That's like, I think 1,300 more or 1,000 more than he was last game. So like if you can get there, then fine. But at the same time, probably going to be pretty tough to get there, especially when a lot of my favorite paydown options on DraftKings are at center, whether it's the popular Claxton, the contrarian Sharp, Robinson, Noel, like these guys are all centers. So that can make it tough. But if you can get there, then fine. Chris Paul at 9,700, only getting 12% ownership. I think that's a decent pivot from someone like Randall. Like if you happen to have a lineup where you can easily fit Durant plus that price range, Randall's a better play than Paul, but he shouldn't be getting 2.5 times the ownership. So just kind of some tournament shots on the Suns, but nothing that stands out as a priority.
All right, then that is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. One more reminder, do us a favor, hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel on the way out and check out all the rest of the content we have today. Other than that, good luck tonight.